Hey guys, just real quick, as you can probably tell from the title, we're starting a new series here. Something I've been very excited about, as you can probably obviously tell, is true crime. We're going to be calling it True Crime Thursdays/Tuesdays. I'm not exactly sure yet, kind of depends on how things go, but for now we're just going to call it TCT, True Crime Thursdays/Tuesdays, whichever one we end up uploading an episode on. But yeah, I don't want to talk your ears off too much here. Kind of want to get into the actual episode. I've worked hard on it, and it's going to be a good one. Very excited about it. We're going to be starting it off a little bit on the lighter side, true crime-wise, just a little bit of white-collar crime. If you're not familiar with Theranos, it's very white-collar when it comes to the crimes that are committed. So something not too gruesome, but I can guarantee there will be some more gruesome or bloody episodes to come. Without further ado, get into this TCT episode, number 1, Theranos. TCT is a true crime series. Characters and events are derived from historical accounts, though all dialogue and monologue is a work of fiction written and produced by World Canon and intended for dramatic purposes only, unless otherwise noted. No dialogue or monologue from characters should be taken as historical fact, nor are exact reflections of the characters in real life. Warning: some episodes of TCT may contain descriptions of violence. Listener discretion is advised. It is July 2015 in Palo Alto, California, on 1701 Page Mill Road. 31-year-old Elizabeth Holmes, founder and CEO of the multi-billion-dollar medical tech company Theranos, watches with nervousness as a swarm of Secret Service agents sweep through the state-of-the-art laboratory in her company's headquarters. She had been looking forward to this day for a while, though was probably anxious under all the stress it brought. Once the Secret Service made their sweep, Elizabeth's actual guest entered with his entourage. Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, walks into the laboratory with his aides and begins to look around. Elizabeth decides to make her move.
As you can see, Mr. Vice President, here at Theranos, we take our mission very seriously. This laboratory is state-of-the-art, and I'm sure you noticed our Edisons there. Those are the final product. Our tests have shown very accurate results.
The Vice President and others looked at the black plastic boxes with a digital display on the top front with hungry curiosity. If they could truly do what Theranos claimed they could, this would change the world of medicine forever.
As you probably already know, sir, they are state-of-the-art. You see, our goal here is to make it easier for the average person to receive blood testing. That's what these Edisons are capable of, with only a small drop of blood nonetheless. I myself have a phobia of needles and don't enjoy getting blood drawn, but these make it much easier. Not to mention, with our partnership with Walgreens, it'll be cheaper and more available for everyone.
The Vice President just looked at her and nodded. She then noticed some of Biden's aides looking at one of the Edison machines more closely. She tried not to show her anxiety and hoped she wasn't pale. She wondered if they knew anything about medical machinery or blood testing. She wondered if anyone in the room really knew enough to notice that they were fake. The whole laboratory was in fact fake. It had been specifically built for the Vice President's visit and never even used as an actual laboratory. She wondered if they'd be able to see through her lies, or, well, half lies, really. She was doing what she had to. None of these people needed to be concerned with the nitty-gritty details. They just needed to know Theranos was on the right track to changing the world for the better. Joe Biden looked at her with his signature squint and smile. She felt even more nervous now. What did the Vice President think? Whatever he said about this visit could make or break Theranos.
It all looks fantastic, Mrs. Holmes.
Elizabeth beamed. Her plan had worked. Theranos, for the past couple years, had a lot of things go wrong, but now had the recognition it needed to stay afloat and get things working the right way. Well, more like the recognition it deserved, if you asked Elizabeth. Theranos would be the most well-known name in medicine, and Elizabeth Holmes would be the richest woman on Earth.
On my way. Adam 1035 Mary.
Murdered his mother's killer, all in the span of 24 hours. The two were
All day over. 925 Adam, all day over.
What's the warrant for?
And it's for 4116 DW David Williams.
Not feeling well.
Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born February 3rd, 1984, in Washington, D.C., to father Christian Holmes and mother Noel Ann. Both parents were what one would consider high achievers. Her mother was a congressional staff member and her father was vice president of the once massive Enron Power Company, which could be a whole episode in itself. He later became an executive of several government agencies. Her family came from a long line of Danish entrepreneurs who started the Fleischmann's Yeast Company, the same one sold at every single grocery store in the US. Elizabeth grew up with a strong work ethic and motivation for success. In high school, she became fascinated with computer programming and managed to start a business selling C++ compilers to overseas universities in China. Compilers are a computer that transfers one code language into another. In this instance, it was C++ into a Chinese coding language. After high school, she attended Stanford University, studying chemical engineering. During her studies, Elizabeth had an internship in the Genome Institute of Singapore during the SARS epidemic, where she did testing on blood samples. In 2003, she filed a patent for a drug delivery patch that worked as a pill or shot that one wore as a sticker rather than having to inject or swallow anything. She believed her idea would work, and much to the dismay of her parents, she dropped out of university the same year to run her own company, now only 19 years old. Growing up, Elizabeth revered people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, who had dropped out of college to create multi-billion-dollar companies, and she wanted to be just like her heroes, innovative, world-changing, geniuses, and filthy rich. Initially, Elizabeth had grand plans with her patch idea. However, she ran into a complication. The technology to make a chip small enough to fit into a 2-inch patch that could diagnose the wearer's blood, decide a treatment, inject the patient with the appropriate drugs, if any, and communicate with an actual doctor did not exist, nor did she know how to make it. Eventually, mostly after some embarrassing sale pitches to potential investors who saw right through her fluke, Elizabeth scrapped her patch. To make up for what skills she lacked, Elizabeth employed her friend Shaunak Roy, a PhD recipient in university, to help her with the development of a functioning device that tests blood droplets for any illness. It was actually Roy who convinced Elizabeth to ditch the patch idea in the first place. Together, they decided on a small handheld device. For the next several years, with development in a device that would actually work instead of something from sci-fi, they were able to acquire around $6 million in investments within the first year. Their new company name was Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. Now, they had an actual office in Palo Alto with dozens of employees and their very own testing and research lab. However, things only look good on the surface. Theranos labs are a mess. Techs can't figure out how to get Elizabeth's device to work. On top of that, quality control is almost non-existent. Non-conclusive tests done by the devices are thrown out. In 2006, Theranos CFO Henry Mosley confronts Elizabeth about these issues. He claims that they must be fixed, not only to get more accurate results, but because they had been lying to investors about their test results the whole time. This was practically fraud, he argued. Elizabeth retorted that with every startup there were issues, and they would work out the kinks, but there was no reason to worry stakeholders with those issues. Mosley didn't like the sound coming from his boss and friend one bit, and tried to plead with her. Elizabeth took the critique from Mosley, but after not being able to sway him to her point of view, fired him. In 2007, Theranos released a new prototype. It was a much larger box-shaped device called an Edison. When asked why the name, Elizabeth Holmes responded, "We tried everything else and it failed, so let's call it Edison." Development and testing goes on for years. All the while, Theranos gains more and more support. Then, in 2009, a major development comes to the company and to Elizabeth. Theranos hires Ramesh, aka Sonny Balwani. He becomes Theranos' COO, Elizabeth's right-hand man, and, not so secretly, her boyfriend, even though he's about 20 years older than her. For several more years, the couple started heavily pushing Theranos and their breakthrough technology, the Edison, gaining even more financial support. They tell their stakeholders that their machines are capable of distinguishing almost any major condition from one drop of blood in a patient. This kind of idea only causes investors to be overly eager to get in on the deal. By 2010, the company was worth over $1 billion. 3 years later, it was nearly $10 billion. What the investors didn't know, though, was that Elizabeth Holmes was inflating the capabilities of her device. Yes, it could test blood via only a single drop stored in a small vial called a nanotainer. However, the Edisons were constantly giving mixed results. Sometimes they would show a patient having a disease or condition they didn't have at all. Other times, it would give negative results when testing a blood sample that was known to have something like HIV. Holmes was marketing her Edisons as a means by which anyone could get their blood tested quickly and efficiently, then make real-world medical decisions based off the information they were given. It doesn't take a genius to realize how catastrophic something like that could be, especially if it were released on a grand scale. P.S. That's called foreshadowing. Now, Elizabeth Holmes was committing fraud on a several billion-dollar scale, and had been for years, with no one but Sonny Balwani knowing the total truth. As far as she was concerned, the stakeholders didn't need to worry about all that stuff. The Edisons just had some issues, with a lot of wrinkles to work out. They would be ready for the public when it came time. In 2013, Theranos and pharmacy mogul Walgreens began meeting over terms for a long-term partnership. Executives at Walgreens are very excited. They beat CVS to the punch and aren't letting go easily, despite some of their technical experts raising red flags during meetings with Elizabeth Holmes and other executives from Theranos. One in particular being Holmes' refusal to allow any Walgreens technicians to visit the Theranos laboratory. Of course, the whole time she's feeding Walgreens false promises and fake numbers. On paper, the results look amazing, but the lab techs and supervisors are frantically scratching their heads trying to figure out how to make the Edisons do what Elizabeth is telling everyone they do. This leads to a lot of turnover. Those who know the truth are sworn to secrecy via contracts, and many leave not wanting the stress or to be part of any backlash. This is when Elizabeth Holmes, now a multi-billionaire with her 50% stake in Theranos, becomes increasingly paranoid. Much like dictators of past, she and Balwani, for that matter, who was already reported as a tyrannical boss, begin being suspicious of every employee. To them, anyone could be a potential whistleblower. Whenever someone would come to Holmes with concerns over the issues with the Edisons and the promises they were making, she would often hit them with the sales pitch she gave stakeholders. Finally, in September of 2013, after a decade of working in the dark, which is to say privately, without public notice, Theranos officially goes public. Their partnership with Walgreens is broadcast internationally. That year alone, they are going to open 40 Theranos wellness centers around the US, including one in Palo Alto. At the same time, they unveil a website with insight on the company and their new medical technology, and all its abilities to change people's lives for anyone with internet access to view. On their website, they offered tests for the aforementioned over 200 different conditions, from cancer to vitamin deficiencies, but apparently only 12 of those tests actually consistently worked. In fact, by the time Theranos wellness centers were to begin opening, the FDA had only approved their herpes test as actually safe and accurate. One man within the company, Tyler Schultz, had been working as a lab assistant for only a few months when the first Walgreens centers were announced in 2013. A recent university graduate, Tyler's grandfather, who happened to be on Theranos' board of directors, had coordinated meetings with Tyler and Elizabeth Holmes. The two hit it off, and Elizabeth ended up hiring him as an intern shortly after. While doing testing on the Edisons against other blood testing machines, he began noticing a lot of discrepancies. As we mentioned earlier, non-conclusive tests were ignored. Mostly, only successful tests were actually recorded. When using pure machines, which required more blood than the Edisons, lab techs would dilute the blood with another liquid, like water or plasma, to get the volume right, but would of course result in bad tests. On top of that, the Edisons were being given traditional vials of blood for testing rather than just a few drops like they were advertised. Quality control didn't exist in the Theranos labs at all. And the issues wouldn't be so bad if they weren't publicly advertising to the world what they were capable of on the new website. And of course, there was the fact too that hundreds of these machines were now out being used by pharmacies and doctors. People were getting phony results, which could be life-threatening for many, and all because of a lie Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes were telling everyone. Now, Tyler understood why his supervisor had quit out of the blue when he first joined. This was serious stuff. Tyler knew better, though, than to make a big fuss. He took his findings instead to Elizabeth immediately. In her office, Tyler showed the CEO the results he was getting. Then, pulling up the new website, he cross-referenced Theranos' false advertising with what his lab results showed otherwise. According to Tyler, Elizabeth retorted that he was stressing unnecessarily, that everything would be fine, and just because he got some bad tests didn't mean the Edisons didn't work, and that of course they would have some issues, but that's why they had the labs working constantly to improve them. Tyler argued that she was false advertising to everyone and that it was practically fraud. Elizabeth told him that all those people don't need to worry about the technicalities. The machines will be ready when they need to be, but thanked him for bringing his concerns to her. Tyler Schultz had tried to reason with Elizabeth, but she wouldn't have any of it. He knew there wasn't anything he could do within the company, and saw that there would be major repercussions for Theranos if things continued down this path. He worried for his grandfather on the board. What would happen if anything came back on him? Tyler would have to look outside Theranos. He would have to blow the whistle. In 2015, John Carreyrou, an investigative journalist for the Wall Street Journal, got a lead on a multi-billion-dollar medical company that was probably lying to the public about its product. Obviously, we're talking about Theranos. John starts digging on the story. His lead describes the founder and CEO, a 31-year-old woman named Elizabeth Holmes, who dropped out of Stanford with only a couple semesters in computer development to create a device that could analyze blood samples as small as a single drop. To John, this sounded like a wannabe Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. He started looking for people who had used the Edisons to get their experiences with the device. He met one woman in Phoenix, Arizona who had taken a test which showed her she was going to have a stroke. She went to the hospital where they ordered more tests which showed that she was actually perfectly healthy. Though not deadly, it scared the woman and put her several $1,000s in the hole. John went with this as a short cover on Theranos, along with some research he did himself. The story released in mid-2015, and Theranos actually took a hard hit despite the vice president's recent approval of the company. Walgreens was especially disgruntled and started treating Theranos with suspicion. They began questioning Elizabeth Holmes, who scrambled to come up with excuses and keep her partners on board. She explained it was just a fluke, but that didn't stop Walgreens from going on the defensive after that. On top of this little cover, John also got in contact on LinkedIn with an ex-employee of Theranos, who was willing to give him some information. Not wanting to be pushy, John tells the informant to give him a call when he can. Nearly a month passes before John is finally able to speak to his informant. John answers his phone.
Hello, this is John Carreyrou. Who am I speaking to?
Hi, you're the Wall Street journalist, right?
Yeah, what can I do for you?
I'm the ex-Theranos employee. We talked over LinkedIn about a month ago.
Oh yeah, I thought you may have changed your mind. Your name's Tyler Kelch, right?
Yeah, listen, I don't know about this. Theranos is threatening to sue anyone who talks, and they have the power to do a lot of damage.
John pauses. Getting a nervous informant to talk can be tricky.
What if you use a pseudonym and remain anonymous?
Then he waits again, hoping he didn't scare off his potential lead.
Okay.
With the information John got from Tyler, he had all the info he would need for a groundbreaking story. Ever professional, he typed it out in no time and sent it to the WSJ editors, where it would have to go through the grueling process of actually making it onto the paper. However, Elizabeth Holmes was fighting back. While John's story was in editing, Elizabeth released an article in the journal basically praising Theranos and its achievements. It was an excellent PR move, going on about philanthropy and how Theranos was changing the world for so many people who didn't have this kind of medical access before. John knew if his story was going to stand a chance at being listened to, it would have to make it out soon. Word on the developing story got back to Elizabeth, which worried her. Theranos had another partnership, this time with Safeway in development. And if more bad news about Theranos got out, it could mean the end of the deal before it even started. However, Elizabeth still had one more weapon up her sleeve. Rupert Murdoch was an executive chairman of News Corp with strong ties in the Wall Street Journal. He was also a friend of Elizabeth and a major investor in Theranos. Elizabeth went to him to ask if he could do anything about this journalist John Carreyrou and the story she knew he was working on. She claimed that the man was an irresponsible journalist and his story was disruptive and full of lies. If it made it out, it could hurt Theranos, which would hurt Rupert's investments. Surprisingly, the media mogul takes the high road and reassures Elizabeth that if Theranos truly is on the right side, then even if the story makes it out, it won't hurt Theranos and only discredit the writer. Also, Rupert trusts his editors. He has faith that if they sniff out any bad leads or false claims, they'll trash the story, and it won't get published at all without any of his intervention in the first place. Elizabeth can't persuade the old man and leaves feeling anxious with nothing else she can do but wait. October 16th, 2015, the story releases, and Theranos immediately receives backlash, including a report from the FDA which calls the Edisons an uncleared medical device. Theranos retorts by claiming the journal's article is not scientifically based and erroneous. Elizabeth is then questioned on stage about the story in Laguna Beach, California, and says, "We know what we're doing, and we're very proud of it." In November, though, the deal with Safeway falls through, Safeway not wanting to take any flack. Elizabeth is devastated and getting desperate. Her dream of becoming the next Steve Jobs is starting to crumble. Early January 2016, Theranos receives a letter from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. Their lab in California failed inspection, putting patients in danger. If they didn't fix the problem within 10 days, they could face legal repercussions. This is the final straw for Walgreens, which shuts down its Palo Alto Theranos Wellness Center and stops sending samples to Theranos headquarters for analysis, which, by the way, is how a lot of the patient blood testing was being done. It was actually at Theranos headquarters. The small nanotainers of a couple drops of patient's blood would be mailed in and tested under the supervision of Elizabeth and Sunny Balwani. Later that year, on April 13th, the WSJ releases another article, also by John Carreyrou and another writer named Christopher Weaver, saying how government regulators are threatening to suspend Theranos from blood testing outright for 2 years for failing to fix issues with their lab. Theranos continues to do what they were doing and are shut down by the CMS, and Elizabeth and Balwani are banned from blood testing. Theranos is given the suspension time to correct over 10,000 false blood tests, and their proprietary device, the Edison, is banned. By June, Theranos' net worth has plummeted to $0 from the over $10 billion it was worth only a couple months prior. Things get so heated that Elizabeth's right-hand man and boyfriend, Sunny Balwani, leaves the company, and Elizabeth. She frantically tries to find a workaround. Her problem is government regulators, she decides. If they can't get in on actual pharmaceutical and doctors' labs, then they would just sell a blood testing device. This would give them a lot more leeway with the CMS and FDA. She would sidestep the government regulators. She would be the next genius that changed the world, and she would be one of the richest people on Earth. She had to be. She hastily designs a new handheld device called a mini-lab. This could be purchased by clinics, hospitals, and private individuals to perform blood testing anywhere. Its functions were based off of the original Edison's, and not much thought went into the new mini-lab's ability to actually perform those functions. On August 1st, 2016 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Elizabeth presented her new tech at a medical conference for the first time ever. She claimed it could carry out a vast array of tests, including detecting the then infamous Zika virus. During the presentation, Elizabeth carefully maneuvered around Theranos' shortcomings and focused on the new devices now capable of communicating over the internet, so for centralized verification of test results. Basically, they could be used anywhere. She hoped she could stabilize Theranos with this conference and get it back on its feet, but despite the hype she threw at the device, no one at the conference bit. Elizabeth was unable to gain any new investors and only received shame and embarrassment when confronted by a board of questionnaires in front of the crowd. By October, Theranos is down the drain. To make matters worse, on Monday the 10th, Partner Fund Management, one of Theranos' investors, files a lawsuit for $96.1 million against the company for fraudulent claims. This obviously puts them in a really bad position. They already are struggling financially, so to save some money, Theranos lays off hundreds of employees and closes several of its clinical labs and wellness centers. If things weren't already worse than they could get, Walgreens then decides to sue 1 month later for $140 million. Now, Elizabeth has 2 major lawsuits on her hands and a company that can't even get its new, much safer product out. For the next year, Elizabeth and people from both Walgreens and Partner Fund meet in court. The suit with Partner Fund is settled in May 2017, and the one with Walgreens in August 2017, with Walgreens now completely dissolving their partnership with Theranos. That year, Theranos lays off nearly 200 more employees and closes its last blood testing location. But that's not all. Theranos still has to deal with the government. In December of 2017, Theranos settles a lawsuit with the state of Arizona over $4.65 million with the state attorney Mark Brunovich. Arizona sued over false advertising, and proceeds from the settlement went to thousands of Arizonans as a full refund for any tests done by Theranos. Also that year, they settled with the CMS over a $30,000 fine, and Elizabeth agreed to not own or operate any clinical labs for at least 2 years, which would be like a forklift operator serving life in prison for killing a coworker with his forklift, and OSHA fining him $10,000 for not wearing his seatbelt while doing it. Ultimately, in March of 2018, the final blow comes when Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani are actually charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, with fraud. For the past several years, they had swindled over $700 million from investors off of lies and false promises, not to mention all the patients they put in danger. The SEC reported the Edisons could only perform 12 out of the 200 tests Theranos claimed they could, so now everyone knew that dirty little secret. 2 months later, John Carreyrou comes back on the scene. As if 2 whole articles wasn't enough, he releases his book, Bad Blood, becoming an instant hit in light of the news on Theranos, and of course shortly after a movie about it is put in production. Director Adam McKay gets rights to produce a film with Jennifer Lawrence as Elizabeth Holmes, but has yet to be released. However, there is a very good short drama series called The Dropout on Hulu. Fast forward to June 2018 and the charges have finally come through. Both Holmes and Balwani are indicted on their criminal charges. However, right before the charges were publicly announced, Theranos announces that Elizabeth had stepped down as CEO. Both her and Balwani pleaded innocent and set about fighting their charges. Theranos General Counselor David Taylor takes over as CEO. That September, he emails the last remaining shareholders of Theranos to tell them the company will be dissolving, and in his letter he wrote, "Unfortunately, none of those leads has materialized into a transaction. We are now out of time." Which is reference to the 80 potential buyers he sought to purchase the company, but who didn't bite. This development is then also announced in a WSJ article from September 5th, 2018 by, you guessed it, John Carreyrou, who, if you visited this article on the WSJ website, is seen in a video playing a game made by a former Theranos employee. It's a parody version of Space Invaders, with the ship being an Edison machine shooting little nanotainers of blood samples, and the invaders being Zika viruses and little pictures of John Carreyrou's head. Finally, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos get the true crime special by getting a documentary made about them by Alex Gibney, who made Dirty Money and The Smartest Guys in the Room, a documentary about Enron, the same company Elizabeth's father was vice president of. Though her dreams have shattered, her company dissolved, and she went from a billionaire to being broke, things aren't all bad for Elizabeth, because at some point throughout mid-2019, she was engaged and married in secret to her boyfriend, Billy Evans. The two had met a couple years prior, and it was love at first sight. Now, it's my task to simply relay the facts, but in my personal opinion, I'm liable to believe that it had something to do with the fact that Billy was a multi-billionaire, with ownership over a hotel chain, and if you remember, Elizabeth had just lost her billions of dollars. Nonetheless, they end up having a child together, while Elizabeth is still fighting her charges. William is born strong and healthy on July 10th, 2021, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, which also conveniently postponed Holmes and Balwani's trials. Despite the setback, she must still go on trial. Elizabeth gets a strategy together and in August 2021 is ready to appear before judge and jury. She has no real legal standing, so her best bet is to appeal to the jury. Elizabeth will attack with two fronts to tug on her peers' heartstrings. First, she goes for a mental illness approach. Not quite insane, but troubled and needing to be dealt with gently. This, she claims, is due to being in a years-long abusive relationship with her COO, Sunny Balwani, who she claimed was awful to her during that time. The trial goes for 3 whole months. 32 witnesses are brought to testify, and it takes the jury nearly 50 hours to reach a verdict. Elizabeth Holmes is found guilty on at least 4 federal charges. And even though she asked for a retrial due to regret expressed by a witness, just 1 out of the 32, mind you, it is denied. She will be going to prison, possibly for 20 years. This is when Elizabeth makes her most desperate move yet. As part of her sentence, she is given around 10 months to settle affairs and say goodbyes before going away. So, in an attempt to delay her incarceration, she and Billy get very busy during those first few months on her plan. She had been convicted in January and should have surrendered herself in December. But before that could happen, Elizabeth became pregnant with her and Billy's second child, a daughter named Invicta. Now the court had an issue. Despite her federal level crime, they couldn't send a pregnant woman to prison, and so the judge delayed her imprisonment until April 27, 2023, to allow Elizabeth to give birth outside of prison. Prosecutors were very upset, but understanding. Some likely suspected Elizabeth had sought out this pregnancy on purpose to delay her punishment. However, they still agreed as long as she was not still free after April 27th. Invicta was born in early April, and when Elizabeth's case was revisited, the jury had pity on her despite her attempted manipulation over them. She was now sentenced to only 11 years and 3 months instead of 20 years, along with the chance for weekend visits from her family. She began her sentence on May 30th, 2023 in the federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. There she still is as of 2024, though her sentence has been slightly reduced due to good behavior. Meanwhile, Sunny Balwani is serving 13 years starting March of 2023 in the FCI Terminal Island Prison in San Pedro, California. Who knows what will happen to these two? If they'll get their sentences reduced even more, and when they get out, if they'll try again to change the world. One thing's for sure, Elizabeth Holmes regretfully will never be like her heroes Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And having your business be such a failure, you go to prison, has to be the most embarrassing outcome. She should have stayed at Stanford and graduated. Being a dropout is hard. Well, that was the first episode of TCT, Theranos. What exactly would possess a woman like Elizabeth Holmes to lie and commit fraud to the extent that she did, not swindling $700 million from investors to build a $10 billion company, all based off of a lie? I mean, I thought about it and I kind of put it this way. It's like, if you're talking to someone, say just normal conversation, they ask you, hey, do you know about this? And you feel that inclination to just say yes because you don't want to look like an idiot. It's kind of like that. I mean, of course it's lying, and lying is wrong. Lying is a sin, and sin is sin. But when you do it at a multi-billion-dollar level, it also becomes a federal crime. And that seems to be the biggest issue Elizabeth ran into, was lying to avoid embarrassment. She seemed to definitely have a little bit of an ego problem, and just let it get way too ahead of her until she ended up in prison for about 11 years. Though as of right now, I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but it's less than that because, like I said, it got reduced due to good behavior. But yeah, I had fun with this episode, had fun researching it and writing it and producing it. This is definitely a little bit more in-depth and a little more heavily produced than our average episodes here. So tell me what you think. If you guys would like to hear more stuff like this will probably, just due to time's sake, because this did take quite a bit of work to put together, TCT will probably for now just be a once a month series until maybe we can get a bit of a better footing under us, get some episodes out, or at least made ahead of time to release them a little more frequently. I'd like to maybe do something like that. But yes, please do tell me what you think if you liked it. And of course, we have more stuff in the works. I mean, this podcast is here for the long haul, so got plenty more ideas me and Alex are working on. Next episode, we'll be back with him going over, well, I don't want to give that away yet, but next episode will be part of your regular scheduled program. So please come back in a couple weeks for that episode and join us sometime next month on a Thursday, possibly Tuesday, for another installment of TCT. And once again, cannot forget, please do rate, review, share this, and most importantly, just thank you ever so much for simply listening. See you next time.